Hey, good evening, welcome, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world and when you're watching this. Anyway, regardless, welcome to the safety meeting. And today is, well, the topic is likely going to be possibly controversial, possibly provocative, possibly evocative, but something I think that's on the horizon because honestly, just like what was it, a Bob Dylan song that said, times they are a-changing? And they have. Things have changed rapidly, and the world today is not what it was 18 months ago. So because of that, there's a lot of different things. And one of them, of course, is there's going to be a lot of new ground broken in labor law, I think. Maybe, maybe not. Hard to say. And that being around the idea of having a vaccine to go to work and what that may entail. So now, honestly, just because today, or I suppose I should do it this way, welcome to Provoking Safety and the Safety Meeting. My name's Kevin. I'm a safety professional, and this is a place where hopefully we can collaborate and share thoughts back and forth. Feel free to log into the chat and hi, Jim from Calgary. Log into the chat, introduce yourself, and use the chat to communicate and say things back and forth. But before we get too far, because today's a bit of a controversial thing, and I always want to make it a habit of reviewing the chat rules, we got just some extra ones today. Now, because this is about vaccine shaming and possibly being a catalyst and a provocation to workplace bullying, there's some special rules. YouTube does not take kindly and does not allow anything in the way of medical advice or any other kind of notion other than what the WHO and the CDC say. So as far as this goes, no medical advice in the chat or in the comments. They'll be edited out later if I find it out it's happening. No expounding or posting or positing any scientific proof. You see it's in quotations. No links about anything regarding pros and cons to vaccine. Just leave that be. And this leads me to the number 3 in the special stream rules. It's not your soapbox, so no pro-vax, no anti-vax. It's not the topic. It's not what we're dealing with tonight. We're going to basically talk about vaccine shaming and is it leading to workplace bullying. So now the rest of the chat rules. Please participate. Introductions are nice. Introduce yourself, log on, have something to say, and ask and answer questions. Let's banter back and forth. Your knowledge and opinions count as long as those knowledge and opinions work with the special rules that I just outlined. And above all and beyond all, be civil. No name calling, no insults, no ad hominem attacks. Let's just be civil and collaborate. So, the first question would always get asked, why is a health and safety channel talking about bullying and harassment? And in recent years, the last couple of decades, there's been a move to take and move bullying and harassment under occupational health and safety legislation in a lot of jurisdictions. And so it sort of becomes a health and safety thing, and rightly so, because the minds and the wisdom at play has finally figured out that mental health is part of the health for health and safety. And bullying and harassment can lead to a decline in mental health of the people being bullied. And not only that, it creates a poisonous work environment, and it just has a detrimental effect to the whole entire workforce. So that's why bullying and harassment falls under occupational health and safety, and then it sort of falls between the HR group and the OHS group as how to deal with it. And the question always gets asked, well, who's supposed to do it? And a lot of people will say there's no right answer. Well, the right answer is whoever's going to do it right. And so it may be HR leading the charge with OHS in a supporting role, or vice versa, OHS leading the charge with HR providing the support. Either way, somebody needs to do it and do it right. Now, that leads to the second topic, and not a lot of people logging in with the chat and so forth at the moment. So I'll ask the question, and I'll likely pose it a couple of times, is in your mind, or do you think, or do you see, or are you seeing it in your workplace that vaccine shaming is becoming like workplace bullying? Like, is there peer pressure to get vaccinated, or vice versa? Is there peer pressure and shaming because people are getting vaccinated? If you look at social media, it falls into two camps. One thing that COVID-19 has done is divided everybody. Honestly, it has, into all sorts of different camps. And so you have people that are pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, people that are, COVID is a very serious thing, people are making a lot of light of it. And so it's divided us as people. And so it's quite possible that that bullying is on both sides of the spectrum. And just to give you an idea, let's just move to a different format here, and we're going to look at just a couple of instances where there's polls being taken, and this one is from the UK, and it was a study that was done. And it's of course not peer reviewed, so it's not necessarily considered an empirical study. Realistically, at this point, it would be anecdotal, but it was led by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and it was in collaboration with the National Health Service, Race and Health Observatory, Public Health England, and of course the Royal College of Nursing. Now, there was a bunch of people surveyed in the healthcare system, and they were asked to agree or disagree, or partly on a scale of strongly disagree, agree, or strongly agree about the fact of, I feel or felt under pressure from my employer to get a COVID-19 vaccine. Now, if we look at it, and I'll leave all of the links will be in the description. After the video's done, I'll edit the description and I'll leave all of the links that I'm talking about, plus some extras. But there was a high percentage, and realistically, it's very surprising, especially amongst healthcare workers, that 75% or more would likely have declined the COVID-19 vaccination, and they feel that they're under pressure to get it. So very disconcerting when you think about it, and they feel that they're under pressure from their employer. So it begs the question, is it possible that employers might be turning a blind eye to the peer pressure in the notion of it being altruistic and for the greater good, that they're allowing the bullying, harassment, peer pressure, whatever you want to call it, go on, because it's possible that this is for the greater good. The more people we get vaccinated, the less chance we have of COVID-19 hanging around, and it may put the pandemic to bed finally. I don't know. It's very hard to consider. And when you look at a couple of other things, the study also noted that feeling pressured had damaging effects, eroding trust and negatively affecting relationships at work, and often exacerbated COVID-19 vaccination concerns and hardened stances on declining vaccination. In other words, when you think about it, if you are pushing a person to get vaccinated or pushing a person to do something, a lot of times you're going to get that pushback. It's no different if you've raised kids and you've tried to get your kids to do something, and the more you pushed it, also it usually caused a rebel, and they push back, and a lot of times it had a negative effect. And so it's neat that this study also noted the same thing, that the more you pushed, the more likely there was to be pushback. Couple of other things to note, that a lot of employers in the United States, and even it's starting to happen in Canada, recently in Alberta in the news, we've had that the Alberta government has got 3. So if you live in Alberta, look at this, you can get put in for a possible $1 million prize just by going and getting a jab in your arm. Yeah, it might be worthwhile to think about it. But also, too, recently they also announced 40 different prizes as of today. This is June 16th. Travel prizes for incentives to get the vaccine. Now, not unusual in the fact that in the United States, they're doing much the same thing. Businesses such as Walmart are offering a $75 US incentive to get vaccinated. There's other employers that are offering perks, cash bonuses, etc. But one of the things to note is they're instructed by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that if they're launching a vaccine drive and making offers of incentives, these incentives cannot be coercive. In other words, it's, look, you win the prize if you get vaccinated, but you'd best try to win the prize. That notion. And it is occurring, I'm told, in a lot of different senses, because employers are possibly allowing peer pressure to take place. And I'm just interested, and if you're tuning in late or you're going to watch the video later, I'd appreciate any comments, even letting me know in the comments if you think it's possible that either employers are going to permit peer pressure and bullying and harassment at work, or vaccine shaming, just to reach their own goals of having their employees vaccinated, or if it's occurring but without the employers knowing, and it's occurring at work. Either way is vaccine shaming and bullying and harassment occurring at work with this incentive and notion to get employees vaccinated. It's important to note a few other things here when we look at it, and a couple of them. And here's a good article from a Canadian lawyer. Can employers require new hires to show proof of vaccination? And Jim's just asked a question. Is it legal for an employer to enforce a vaccine for his workers in Alberta? And here, how about we address that right here? And this is from Peninsula, a legal and HR firm that's actually worldwide, but this is from a Canadian article. And it's, remember that you cannot not force an employee to get vaccinated. Like a flu shot, the COVID-19 is a personal choice. You'll put your business at risk of a lawsuit if you impose a mandatory COVID-19 policy at work. Now, and Jim Morton, a good note on that. The issue would be proving the incentive is bullying. Absolutely. But getting back to the earlier question is, no, in Canada, actually, believe it or not, in the UK as well, as I've said, I'll leave articles in the description and links. But Canada, you cannot force a person to get a vaccine. Now, you have to remember that there is other laws at play here, and this is why this is not something that's going to get solved overnight. It's not going to come out in the wash, likely for a while longer, is that if there's a bona fide occupational requirement, because above all and beyond all, employers are legally obligated in most jurisdictions in North America and in a lot of different places in the world to provide a healthy and safe workplace for their employees. Plus, they're required under usually what's called a general duty clause to, in the absence of any other regulation, law, or legislation, to ensure that health and safety measures are in place to ensure the health and safety of their workers. So this means, and here's a good example, and of course this is, I don't know if there's any test case, but here's a probable example where there'd be a bona fide occupational requirement. Let's say that you're going to be a worker in a long-term care home, and there's been several outbreaks of COVID-19. Now, most likely the patients there have been vaccinated and a majority of them are well. But because there's been several outbreaks, the employer has a duty to protect the workers. And so it might be a case where that mandate to have the workers vaccinated might actually stand up in court. But once again, this is a huge legal wrangling, and this is new ground. This is untested, and it's a good possibility that we will see these become future court cases and set a mandate. Because right now, the law is such, as I've said, you cannot force an employee to get vaccinated. Not at all. Not in Canada. And in fact, there's, and I'll leave the links below, there also are articles saying that there's some states in the U.S. that are not going to enforce any employer mandate to get a vaccine. In other words, they're removing it from their legislation, or they haven't had it. They're not going to put it in place. The U.S. works a lot different than Canada. So once again, it's becoming a testing ground for that as well. Another question from Jim. How about an offsite consultant entering the workplace for his or her client? Once again, really and truthfully, how about, Jim, I get around to that question, because this might be a bit of a better answer to that, in that employers, what they need to do is start from the ground up. They're going to have to likely start and enter and edit their health and safety policies to have some sort of a vaccine mandate or a vaccine policy. But once again, they do run a risk. Can they mandate a consultant? Quite possibly, because they're not part of their workforce. So can an employer mandate a consultant? There's a good possibility. But once again, is there a bona fide requirement for it? It's also about choices, where in this case, you're going to have to possibly make a choice. If one employer, let's say Employer X doesn't care. They don't worry about it. They're not going to mandate any vaccine requirements because they don't want the legal headache. They don't want to have to go to court. Employer Y, on the other hand, says, you know what? We're going to mandate it. We're going to tell all of our employees to get it, and we'll deal with it when the time comes, which is entirely possible. So now you have a choice. Employer X says, no, you could come in, don't worry about it. We're not going to require you as a consultant to get a vaccine. Employer Y says, we require you because we require it of all of our workforce, so we're going to require it of you. And so now you have to make a choice. Do I just do work for Employer X, or do I get a vaccine and do them for both? Like I said, it becomes this murky legal swamp that we have to deal with. And yes, Jim Warden said, in regards to a contractor, the risk hazard assessment should be applied in this case. And so once again, Jim, when you're looking at the risk hazard assessment, is there, what's the risk? And of course, the risk is one employer, the employer dealing with the consultant, contracting COVID-19. So what are your controls in place? Obviously, vaccines all around, or is there going to be some control where there's social distancing, both are wearing masks, possibly even an engineering control of a plexiglass barrier between the two of them, etc.? So it's, once again, you have a risk assessment that you've done, and then are the controls that you've applied sufficient enough to alleviate the risk? And the only way really you can do that is quantify your risk, then quantify your controls, put them together and match it up. Jim Stepik, do I consider the vaccine requirement bullying for the consultant? No, I don't. It becomes a condition of doing business. And we're going to find that with employers going through this, going forward. We're going to find that there's going to be employers that are going to require it, employers that aren't. We're going to find that there's going to be consultants who, just like any other condition of employment or condition of hire or contractual requirements, who are going to jump through the hoops, and there's others that won't. So do I consider it bullying? No, I don't. I just consider it a contractual requirement. Although you'd have to speak to a lawyer, I don't know how they would, usually when you have pieces within a contract, usually they're negotiable. So I don't know how you're going to negotiate around that. That's where it becomes difficult. Just give me a second. I got to have a sip of water. So getting back to the other questions, yeses or nos, do you see peer pressure for vaccinations happening in the workplace? And if you do, are employers turning a blind eye for the altruistic motive of, hey, this way we'll get everybody vaccinated and we'll put this baby to bed and be done with it? Okay, fair enough. So now, where do we go from here as, how should we say, a solution? What are the solutions? One of them, of course, is going to be policy. And how do you construct that policy? Because no matter what, your policy will still have to hold up in a court of law. And so I guess this begs the question, do you think that employers, as I said, we have employer X and employer Y, do you think that employers are going to either say, no, we're just going to follow, we're going to look at the law, we're not going to worry about the possibility of a legal headache, we're just going to let the chips fall where they may, and just try to deal with it as it comes? Or are we going to have the employers on the other side of the spectrum who are going to say, you know what? I figure that most people will just walk away and they won't bother taking us to court, so we're going to mandate vaccines. I mean, that's the next question, right? And where do we fall? We need to be in the middle of the road is what we need to find. That age-old Christian principle of grace and trying to understand the other person, I think, comes into play here. And writing a policy that's going to accommodate the most amount of the workforce as possible, being in line with the law. We have to remember that the policy we write today has to be good for tomorrow. It has to be able to evolve with the law if at all possible. And it's likely possible it's going to have to be fluid and agile enough that it may need to be rewritten. Oh, good question. Would this lead to a two-tier workplace, the vaccinated and the non-vaccinated? That's an excellent question, because one of the principles of bullying and harassment is you cannot segregate a worker or other workers for any reason. You can't, like, picture you walk into the coffee room and you say, and there's 8 people there, and you say to 7 of them, hey, all you 7, let's go out for a beer, and you ostracize the other person or you ignore that other person. That's actually a form of bullying. So if we have a two-tier workplace, the vaccinated and the non-vaccinated, there needs to be an idea of accommodation. We still have to remember that there's also other laws at place here. And an employer has a reasonable duty to accommodate up to undue hardship for whatever reason that a worker needs an accommodation based under protected rights. And so that means, I don't know how we would talk about, and I really don't want to get into it, the idea of this is against my religion. But let's say, for instance, that the employee had some sort of a health reason that they couldn't get vaccinated. I don't know what it would be, and I am remiss I didn't really research that. But we would have to make, the employer would have to make some allowances and accommodations for that person. So if it leads to a two-tier workplace where you have the non-vaccinated are given the opportunity to work from home, but are not ignored for any of the company perks or other incentives because they're working from home, then it wouldn't be a bullying situation. But if you're saying vaccinated on that side of the workplace and unvaccinated on that side of the workplace, and the two of you can't mix, then you might run into trouble. Another statement here, based solely on my experiences in the last year, just about every business that was open during the pandemic, almost in every case, management defaulted to provincial. And absolutely right, Jim Wharton. we have no choice. The law, the legislation is what we base everything on. So if you base, like for instance, let's take the idea in Alberta here with on July 1st, the hope is that all restrictions lifted, we're back to normal. That's great, but in Calgary, the municipal requirement for businesses is, and any commercial workplace, is that mask mandates have to stay in place until December 31st. So that means if you have a business license granted by the city, in most cases, you would have to still maintain that mask mandate. Once again, not a lawyer, not going to fight that one out. But yes, we always default to the legislation. So getting back to the answer, building your policy based on the current legislation and what's going to be doable, because too many workplaces will create a policy that you almost have to be Houdini with this hidden set of keys to get in and out of it. Like it just becomes impracticable to try and work around. So the policy has to be doable and practicable. It has to be workable. In the same token, it has to be revisited and it has to be reassessed, likely on an almost annual basis, because this is all going to evolve as laws change. But what about this? What about if companies actually took health and safety seriously, and the health part seriously, and promoted awareness campaigns where there was things like lunch and learns or what have you, where even if they brought in a health nurse or some sort of health professional that would provide advice and information to a group of people that's unsure about it. So, and you can't, that's the other thing, is you can't say, did you get vaccinated? Did you get vaccinated? Did you get vaccinated? The only reason that you could ask that is for the purposes of accommodation. You can't ask, it's a personal health thing, so you can't do it. People can self-disclose that they got vaccinated, but you can't go and solicit the information. So it becomes a catch-22 situation and rather difficult. So what if we were to create awareness campaigns? What if we were to provide lots of pamphlets and literature, and not just the usual stuff that you get from Alberta Health Services or BC Ministry of Health or wherever, but actually take the time to do them up with a company perspective, with a personal perspective, and addressing things like employee concerns, employee fears, but also being brave enough to answer that question, what if I don't want to get vaccinated? And being prepared. And the ideal thing is going to be, you still have a job here. We just have to figure out a way to work around it. Of course, it makes more headaches for the employer, but you can't force an employee to get vaccinated. And as I said at the beginning of the stream here, if there's a bona fide occupational requirement where it may be for the protection of the employee. Another good possibility would be any kind of health care, especially if they're going to be dealing with workers that are going to be, dealing with patients that are infected. It may be that employers could mandate it and then hope to fight it out in court, but once again, you still can't force the employees to do it. Just like a flu shot or anything else, as I said in the beginning, or right here, remember that you cannot force an employee to get vaccinated. We have laws that we have to abide by. So you can strongly suggest it and outline, because it's like wanting to wear a bulletproof vest when when you're a police officer. Healthcare workers have a higher degree of possibility of contracting COVID just because of the environment. But once again, Can they do it, or will the employer do it and say, we'll just face the consequences later from either the union or legal action or whatever? I don't know. As I said, this is uncharted territory and very difficult on how we're going to figure it out. But the whole purpose of this stream was to have some questions and answers and be able to ask the questions and outline what we think might be some decent solutions. What do you guys in the chat think? What would you like to see if you were an employee and you were concerned, you were nervous about the vaccine for whatever reason, or you were unsure, and what do you think you would want to see from your employer? Myself personally, I think I would like to see an employer provide some awareness and also some guarantees that, you know what, I'm still going to have a job. I'm a valued employee for my and absolutely right, Jim Wharton. There's no way a private or union-based employers would attempt such a measure as segregation. Absolutely not. Oh, is it legal to have your pay? No, Jim. Jim S. It's you can't have your pay rates as an employee based on your vaccine status. No, they can offer. Remember, I said at the beginning, and here you are. Vaccine incentives can't be coercive, and that would be coercive. So, in other words, if you don't get a vaccine, you're going to have your pay dropped, or you're going to lose the ability to go to the company picnic or something to that effect. You can't have any kind of punitive action because you're not taking the vaccine. That's no different than bullying and harassment. It's also against the law. Yes, personal freedoms, absolutely. And so it becomes this very much a balancing act. And that's as health and safety professionals, that's what we do. And that's what we're stuck with most of the time is trying to navigate that balancing act. We will walk a tightrope as safety professionals with the marketability and operability of the organization on one hand, and the risk management and safety legislation on the other hand, and we'll have to try and make sure that there's always this equal balance. And the same thing goes for COVID-19. Is no different than, really and truthfully, when you get right down to it, any other health and safety hazard. So how do we maintain that balance? And it's going to be dealing with doing a proper risk assessment, and then figuring out the controls to control that risk and ensuring that the environment is safe for all of the workers. You're going to have to, on the flip side, deal with those coworkers in a respectful manner that are sort of having a lot of fear because the employer is not making other coworkers get the vaccine. So there's the other side of the coin, and that's where I said this notion of grace has to come into play. And the employer, I don't know, I'm certainly not envious of any employer right now because they are going to have to play a very touchy balancing act. And it's not about keeping which numbers and we have 50 employees that didn't get vaccinated and we have 100 that did, and so we've got to look at the 100 before we look at the 50. No, we have to look at people as individuals, and we have to also respect the concern that those employees that have been vaccinated have had a lot of concern over COVID-19, and the concern that they might be put in jeopardy by unvaccinated employees. So there has to be a look at that as well, and constructing the health and safety policies around that, plus having the awareness on both sides of the coin. It is a very tough balancing act, and it is a very sticky situation. I don't know what all of the answers are other than having waiting for the guidance that we can get from the government and implementing it as soon as we can in a personalized method for the organization. Because one of the things I hate to see is organizations just regurgitating and taking and printing out PDFs that they're given by the government because there's no personalization to it. There isn't. The idea is employers should personalize the processes that are outlined and the guidance outlined by the government, which is a lot of times performance-based. In other words, here's your guidelines, here's your box. Whatever you do inside the box is fine, just don't go outside the box. And that's a performance guideline. So the employers will, the government has some prescriptive requirements and some performance requirements, and those are going to evolve. And we have to, as health and safety professionals, employers, consultants, workers, and co-workers, live within those constraints and understand that what's today will be different tomorrow. Just a couple of interesting facts. Like, a lot of people don't understand that here we see that we're dealing with it here in Alberta, here in Canada. Even in the UK, they're dealing with it as, and their laws are very similar to ours in Canada. And I've highlighted a part here, the Public Health, the Control of Disease Act in 1984, legislates to prevent the control and mitigate the spread of contamination or infections, but it specifically states that members of the public should not be compelled to undergo mandatory medical treatment, including vaccinations. Good question. What happens when the local city has a different vaccine mandate than the province and different from the country? Which mandate rules? As far as a worker and an employee, the municipality, even with their own municipal employees, still has to abide by the provincial legislation. Now, the only employees that don't fall under provincial legislation are those that are federally mandated, which would be things like the RCMP, telecommunications workers, railway workers, anything that's intermodal in between the provinces. Banking also falls under federal mandate. So they would fall under federal requirements. All other workers in a province in Canada fall under the provincial requirements. It doesn't matter if they're a city employee or not. The municipality can't make you get vaccines. Now, on that note, now we're falling under a different idea of commerce and consumerism. And can stores bar people? Well, I don't know at this moment that they can. It would also require some sort of definitive vaccine ID and the notion of vaccine passport, which, of course, this stream isn't all about. More about the idea of bullying, harassment, employees' rights at the workplace, and how we're going to, as professionals, overcome them. And I like the questions. Really good questions, guys. Awesome. I was hoping we would get some other health and safety people on here, but it didn't seem to. So not a big deal, nothing serious. If you're out there in the netherworld and haven't weighed into the chat, please weigh in. So by and large, just a quick recap. We won't beat this too much more. There is a difference between local city bylaws and provincial mandates. Yes, there is, but not as far as workers go. Workers, we have an occupational health and safety legislation. The way it works in Canada is the provinces are mandated to determine their own health and safety legislation. And then every worker within that province, unless they fall under a federal mandate, such as mining, railway, banking, telecommunications, etc., fall under those provincial occupational legislation mandates. Now, municipalities can do things for their municipal properties or anybody that holds a business license, but can they mandate to those workers within that area? No, they can't. That falls under occupational health and safety legislation. However, looking at something like mask mandates, for instance, there is a municipal requirement for mask mandates here in Calgary. For every commercial operation has to require that all occupants of the building are wearing a mask. So if the employees in there aren't wearing a mask, yes, they fall under that municipal requirement, but it's not a piece of health and safety legislation. So there is a bit of a difference between the two, and sometimes there's a bit of overlap, shall we say. Yeah. So anyway, getting back, we're starting to run close to the end of the time here. So just as a bit of a summary, the question was asked, do we see that there's a possibility of vaccine shaming taking place in the workplace? And there's hints at it, little bits of indications that it is. Also some surveys that have been done, and a lot of them, of course, are anecdotal, not empirical evidence, but anecdotal that there is vaccine shaming and vaccine shaming going on in the workplace. Are employers turning a blind eye? It's hard to determine if that's occurring right now. Not sure. But what do we do in the meantime? And when it falls right down to it, ideally having good clear health and safety policy that will address these concerns on both sides, with those employees that have that are concerned about getting the vaccine and don't want to get it at this point. Because a lot of people are still sitting on the fence and they're not sure if they want to get it, but there's some that are absolutely against it. And weigh it with the concerns of the coworkers or the employees that are vaccinated but do have valid concerns. Consider some awareness campaigns, consider some literature that's personalized for the workforce at your area, and also personalized maybe for those employees, like not seeking them out, but personalized if you're going to do it and you have, say, a staff of mechanics, then personalize it around what would be the mechanics' concern. What would be the concerns of the mechanics, and personalize it that way. If you go and download a bunch of literature for healthcare professionals or restaurant workers, and you have a shop full of mechanics, it doesn't apply. So personalize your information for your audience, and address those concerns and address the employees' concerns. Make sure that you're not skirting the laws or disobeying the laws by trying to force somebody to get a vaccine, and operating with that notion of grace, shall we say. Yeah, and the final question is, can I be fined if I follow provincial mask mandate but not the city mandate? Is this legal? And yeah, actually, Jim W. was right. Yes, it was. Yeah, so there we go. Anyway, I don't want to beleaguer this too much and go beyond it, but thank you all for participating and taking part. Don't forget, if you're watching this afterwards, leave a comment. Let me know in the comment section what you thought. Like, dislike, that's fine. I prefer likes. Likes are always appreciated. If you're, what's the next step in the short term to educate workers and employers? The next step in the short term is I'm hoping that the government will have more of a, how should we say, they've got to do more than just have these at the end of the day announcements and everything about the current state of healthcare. They've got to go forward and work with the different organizations, such as employer groups like farm safety groups and construction associations and the different industry-based associations, and help them to have a better awareness process going forward. And as I said, all of this has to be fluid. What we do today will likely be changed a month from now or even tomorrow for all we know. It's a good possibility that it can change, and we might not understand how much it's going to change until it changes. And really and truthfully, that's it. I honestly, the best bang for anybody's buck as far as health and safety goes in trying to shift culture in a large group of people, like provincially or even nationwide, is start to work with industry groups, teachers associations, and so forth, and work with them and trying to have awareness campaigns and how you're going to deal with those employees that aren't being vaccinated. And who knows, you know what? The laws may change. It may get mandated both federally and provincially that employers can require, based under certain criteria, that their employees get vaccinated. It's entirely possible. That may change tomorrow or the next day. We don't know. At this point, though, they can't. That's what we do know. Did that answer your question there, Jim Stepik? The next step in the short term? Or do you have other solutions? Possibly typing feverishly. Thank you for the stream. Good information process. Okay, yeah, great. So thank you all. As I said, I'm going to try and do it every 2 weeks. The next one, I want to talk about the politics of health and safety. Not politics and health and safety, but the politics of health and safety. Because honestly, we as health and safety professionals, one would think that we put forward a process, a procedure, or a new way of doing things that it would be accepted just like that. And no, it's not the case. Often we have to try and sell what we're doing. It belies simple logic in the fact that when you want to try and do something safer, you'd think that it would get carte blanche acceptance. But that's not necessarily the case. So next session in 2 weeks, I want to talk about the politics of health and safety, and I'm hoping that more of you will join me. But anyway, do me a favor, until we see each other again, don't just think about safety, don't just talk about it, but actually do it. Take care. Bye for now.